Hey everyone, today we're talking about the Constitution and the law, and specifically with a focus on how the Constitution impacts business. So I want to do a quick recap on a few things for where the law comes from. You'll remember that we have the law originating from really three places. The Constitution, right, that U.S. document that is what gives our legislative, executive, judicial branch its powers, and what essentially all of the law in the U.S. stems from, essentially from all of this. But then, above and beyond the Constitution, or at least in addition to the Constitution, we write statutes that should be constitutional, but statutes that are essentially legislative laws that our state and federal legislators enact. This is a lot of the law that you see, traffic laws and things are all statutes. And then common law, and that's judge-made law, common law. So judges are interpreting the law and modifying and creating precedent. We talked about that in one of our last lectures. And so common law is always changing and really living. But they're trying to interpret sometimes statutes, sometimes just a judge law throughout the year, but interpreting it always in light of the Constitution. So these things are always working together. The first thing I want to talk about in terms of the Constitution, we're going to look at a few different areas, but I want to talk about the commerce power. And there are certain powers, legal powers that the Constitution provides, and one of them is the commerce power. And the commerce power asks, what affects interstate commerce? So the key here is interstate commerce. So this is business transactions that are happening between states. States have the ability to enact their own laws. We have the Constitution is our umbrella. Each state is like its own little nation that gets to create its laws. But this can be problematic because states like to protect themselves and their own industries. So they'll enact a law that says, for instance, Wisconsin, you can't import cheese into Wisconsin because we want Wisconsin to only export cheese, right? That's something that affects interstate commerce. It's how is commerce leaving and coming into Wisconsin through Minnesota? Think about our interstates, our highways. We want the federal government to be able to affect these things and be able to enact laws about them, because we don't want, Wisconsin to say, well, we're going to have people drive on the opposite side of the road, and then you drive into Minnesota and you have to switch, and it's confusing, and that would be very complicated, right? So our federal government has the ability to make sure that interstate commerce is fluid, okay? That states aren't protecting themselves, that states aren't maybe trying to harm another state, that they're not doing things, making laws that make our national business environment unfriendly. So the case we want to look at that you read today is called Bibb versus Navajo Freight. And this is an interesting case. Now, it's about trucks and it's about mud flaps. And I realize that doesn't sound very interesting, but it's a great illustration of that commerce power. So Bibb versus Navajo what happened in this case is that the state of Illinois decided that it was going to require this extensive mud flap when you entered the state. And what's particularly interesting about these mud flaps, they're very, very complicated. They're large. They required you to stop and get out and actually do some very significant work. It wasn't just go and slip on a mud flap. You had to actually, remember, this is a big semi-truck, right? So semi-trucks, freight trucks, you had to go and you had to do, jack up the truck, do some work underneath to actually weld and bolt things onto the frame. And they were, requiring this coming into the state. And so, you got to ask, okay, what's the intent of a law like this? Why would somebody want to require giant mud flaps? And it just doesn't really make sense. I mean, it seems arbitrary. So why does the federal government care? Well, you have you have in every other state, essentially every other state, there was no mud flap requirement. So when you got into it came to Illinois, which, if you drive across I-90, you're driving across the United States, you're going to drive through Illinois. But you come to I-90, you come into that state, and you have to stop your truck, you have to get out, you have to take everything out of the truck, right? Unload it so you can jack the truck up, and then reload it. And probably most people aren't carrying these mud flaps, so you have to buy the mud flaps at the state border. You have to hire someone to weld them on or bolt them on, because that's not something that truckers are going to have. So what's actually happening here, right? This is Illinois being sneaky. They are creating a tax, right? You can imagine this, like at every state border, there is now an industry that's been created around these mud flaps. And Illinois is making money, right? Their industries are making money. Now they've created jobs because they've created a whole mud flap manufacturing market. They've created a market for the transloading that has to happen to empty the truck and fill it back up. They've created, a market for mechanics that are putting these on. And they've probably even bolstered the Illinois shipping market, because a lot of people who want to ship through or into Illinois, well, they don't want to go through all this, so they'll back up. They have these like the border in Mexico, right, where you back up from one side and then you just load directly into another truck in the United States across the border, and they just move everything across the border and you go. So probably these things are going to happen, and that's the way that freight is now going to transfer through Illinois. So they're going to make a ton of money here. It's a pretty wise idea for the state, if you will, but it's sneaky. It's sneaky. And so what the federal government is coming in and saying, look, you're essentially trying to create a tax, but more importantly, you're burdening that interstate commerce through your state, right? Commerce is not flowing anymore. We've got this thing that's appending it, that's creating confusion and difficulty here, and it's not allowing the free flow. So the United States came in, looked at this, and declared this law unconstitutional, at least, or that they could enact a law. It's constitutional to enact a law to protect interstate commerce. Interstate commerce is not the most exciting topic in terms of the law, but it's powerful in how it affects business. We're going to look at a couple other cases. But this is Bibb versus Navajo freight in a nutshell.